Hey there, Andrew Kercher here with Thumbcoast TV. I'm here at a city hall. I'm going to show you which one if you don't know already. As soon as we hit that intro, come with me around the block. Excited to bring you another one of these around the blocks. We're in a new location. If you haven't guessed, I'm at another city hall here in the Blue Water area, the Thumbcoast area. And of course, before we get too far today, I of course want to thank our sponsors, Adair Supply. They've got what you need for restoration. They are open all winter long. Pretty cool stuff. Check them out over at Adair Supply, pretty conveniently located. But this should give you maybe a little bit of an idea. We've walked a little bit further away from the building. We are, of course, in Marine City today. Marine City, home of an amazing number of historic buildings. I don't even think we're going to get to all of them today, but I want to talk about a couple of the really cool buildings. So we'll flip things around here and take a look at the beautiful City Hall. Now, this is the former City Hall. This is a building they're not still using as a City Hall. You always know it's a good thing when they have one of those green state historical markers that is mounted, like right on the building itself. But this is a pretty amazing one. We're going to come around to the side and take a look at that and do a little bit of a walk around downtown Marine City. So we've of course got this kind of gazebo here. There's a lot of people who meet, but I think this corner we can really start to appreciate some of the really cool architecture here in Marine City. They've got themselves a nice little historic district. We can see their sign here erected by the Friends of City Hall in just 2017, so it's still a building people are plenty talking about. So if we take a look at this building, one of the first things we notice is some of that massing. This is a very heavy brick building. It's got a lot of these low arches, and this is very indicative of Richardsonian Romanesque. So H.H. Richardson's, Henry Hobson Richardson, was this architect. He died about 1881, so he may have died actually before this building was even built. He didn't design it, but there's a style he is so associated with. The entire style is named for him, Richardsonian Romanesque. So the Romans, if you think like, ancient Rome, they love their arches like this. You think about aqueducts or things like that. That's something they were fond of, and that's something that comes back. So it's a Romanesque, it's a Roman revival, but with some really cool 19th century features. And we can see a lot of those in this building, from the really cool tower here. This looks like, I'm guessing, an octagon. Looks like 8 sides here in the tower to these arches, and you can even see the little arches up here almost look like crenellations, like you'd see in kind of a Gothic revival or something like that. So pretty amazing building that has gone through a lot of work. Like I said, I think the future is kind of up in the air a little bit, exactly what they'll use it for. Obviously the structure of something like this with these bricks, boy, that is a very sturdy style building as well. I love that even the windows here mirror the arches that are in front of them with that round window. Now, this is a building that was designed by Mason and Rice. Mason and Rice were well known for a lot of churches. They were two of perhaps the most famous architects to come out of Detroit. In fact, in the 1880s, Albert Kahn, who probably is the most famous architect to come out of Detroit, had his internship with Mason and Rice. Makes me wonder if maybe he ever saw some of the plans for this when they were working on this building in 1884, because it's the time he would have been basically getting them coffee. So pretty cool little story there, all about Marine City. There's a little bit of the history, and there's one addition in the back. It's pretty sympathetic, so it matches kind of everything off the back here, but a really cool building to see. And again, we can see a lot of the arches here as well. We even see some of the arches have bars over the top, so it must be something pretty secure in that room for sure. So we see that cornerstone, 1884. So just one of the really prominent buildings that you see here in Marine City. It's hard to miss when you're passing through. If you're heading on M25, you're heading south, you're heading north, you're going to pass by this building. It's kind of a pivotal corner here in Marine City. And Marine City has some really cool history. Marine City, it goes back quite a long way, although the name Marine City is relatively new. We're going to look at a couple other buildings here in town and head on over to a little lighthouse that's pretty fun here in downtown. But one of the cool things about Marine City, that's the name they picked when they incorporated as a city itself, rather than simply just a village like they had all the way before that. The village goes back to like the 1830s. Samuel Ward, and his house is just a couple of blocks away. Maybe we'll add in a little segment where we go take a look at that. There are a lot of great historic homes in Marine City. Okay, now we're across the street. You can again see that great city hall right there in the background. But take a look at this. We are also in front of one of these amazing brick churches in town. This is now an antique store. And boy, if you like antiquing, Marine City is the place for you. There's like 10, 12 antique stores. That's what I'm going to do when I think I'm done filming here. And some amazing stained glass. One of the things that we've talked about many times on many of my walks is that stained glass, of course, designed to look good on the inside of the building, can be, you gotta get a sense of it from the outside, but really hard to get a real sense of just how beautiful that is. And the church here has a great nautical theme. You know, the Bible has so many nautical stories in there. You know, the fishers of men and all that. And in fact, I think that's what we see on the inside of this stained glass window. It's kind of hard to again make out on the outside, but that is, I believe, like Christ walking on the water, the Sea of Galilee, an amazing story that gets projected onto the inside of this very nautically themed church. There's definitely a lot going on there. But we're going to keep walking down to the park here and talk a little bit more about the history. As I mentioned, Marine City gets its name later on when they incorporate into an actual city. For many years, this was a village, and this was simply Newport. It's one of those names that, I don't know, sounds vaguely familiar, but also lots of places have a Newport. I'm glad they went with Marine City. Samuel Ward is kind of one of the major city founders here, village founders. And Samuel Ward is related to E.B. Ward, one of Michigan's first millionaires. So they would make a lot of the money, appropriately enough, in shipbuilding around town. There were dozens and dozens of ship manufacturing dry docks and dockyards here back in the second half of the 19th century. So it makes sense that when they went from Newport in like the 1830s, right around the time Michigan was gaining its statehood in 1836, to Marine City for all of that marine business that they were taking on at that time. One of the things that I remember really distinctly as a kid, as we walk towards the park here, is where I want to take a look and we'll get a good view of the river. There was a TV show I used to watch on the History Channel called Mail Call with R. Lee Ermey. He was that guy, you've seen him in movies, he's always plays the drill sergeant, right? And this was a show on the History Channel where he took questions, demonstrated weapons, that sort of thing. Well, I remember one time someone wrote in a question, I couldn't even tell you what the question was, but he was from Marine City, and I guess R. Lee Ermey, who was a Marine, thought that was very funny, and I never thought about it. I always thought of it as marine waterways, not Marines like the soldiers, right? So, interesting connection there. All right, so we've made it here now to the end, at the corner of Broadway and Water, and we're gonna walk here into Broadway Park, which is kind of one end of the beautiful little downtown. A lot of these beautiful 19th century buildings right here on the St. Clair River. Today's kind of a hazy day. It's nice because it's warm. This feels like a veritable heat wave today because, you know, it's in the 40s, but still lots of ice out on the water, lots of snow. A nice little park right here. You know, and speaking of marine, this is one of the things that always catches my eye whenever I head to a public park or anything like that. There's a piece of ordnance right? So I always thought these are really cool. We've got a little piece of naval ordnance, looks like a deck gun. If I were a betting person, and we'll see if maybe there's anything written on it, I think this is a 3-inch gun. So named for the diameter of the barrel. These were really popular, kind of dual purpose. You could shoot at airplanes with them. You could shoot at other ships right up close. Looks like we're missing maybe a few bits and pieces. Yeah, I think this is maybe a Mark 7 3-inch gun, very popular because they're relatively small to put on lots of different ships. Anything you can bolt that onto doesn't take up too much room. But always nice to have a little piece of ordnance in a tiny little public park. But like I said, a great park. And a lot of people come down here to watch the water, watch the ice flows, and watch the freighters go by, which are always easy to see. Lots of birds out on the water today. And you can see in this park, you can get right up to the water's edge. There it is, the St. Clair River. So the lifeblood of Marine City, which makes a whole lot of sense, right? To have that right there. Now, it's not the only river in town. There is also the Bell River. So the Bell River connects through, like a lot of the communities in the Thumb Coast area. There's a smaller river that's coming from somewhere in the Thumb that's connecting out either the lake or the St. Clair River. And that's one of the reasons Marine City, I mentioned Samuel Ward. You know, he's not the first person to live here. Of course, indigenous people pop by since time immemorial. They're in and around this area. And you actually have some French ribbon farms. Before that, the French set up, there was a little Fort the Pinery in St. Clair on the Pine River. It's a little north of here. But the Bell River, some of those French farms get set up really far back. So really an interesting piece of kind of local history. So again, we can see a lot of these buildings, not all of them as connected as you see in a place like, say, Port Huron, where there's a nice 19th century buildings downtown. But we know, St. Clair went through a lot of urban renewal. Some of that came down here, but we're fortunate that we have a lot of these buildings with these kind of original facades, which is great to see. I love this kind of modern mansard roof here with the 3 windows. It's a really thick roof there on Gars. So lots of good restaurants, and like I mentioned, lots and lots of antique stores here in Marine City. But we're gonna go look. There's actually another item, another building right around the corner here that I believe is listed in the National Historic Register. So here we have the big building here, this apartment. Appropriately enough, it's named Newport Manor. Remember, this Marine City was originally Newport. So if you've ever wondered or thought, well, that's kind of a random name, it's tied right in with the area. Another one of these beautiful signs. It's kind of hard to see, and I don't even know exactly how well this shows up on camera. But if you take a look at the building right here, there's actually a pretty prominent ghost sign where you can see there was a lot of different signage painted over the years. I see the word hardware right there, loud and clear, sporting goods on the edge of the building right there. Also kind of a unique looking A-frame across the street, like 3 different pitches and gables. Now we're coming to that next building I teased you about, but before we get to it, we're going to walk up and take a look right over here. We're going to take a quick break again to thank our sponsor, the reason we can do this, over at Adair Supply. So take a look.
At Adair Supply, we believe in hard work, hometown pride, and materials that stand the test of time. Whether you're building new or bringing life back to something old, you'll find it here. Quality lumber, reclaimed treasures, and small town service you can count on. Adair Supply, your hometown source for new and reclaimed building materials. Located on St. Clair Highway, and we're open all winter.
Okay, we're back. So we've got some neat little, this is Veterans Park here. We've got some sculptures here. The man's rising to give a salute from the wheelchair. The fire department over here. But it's actually another city building that gives us that extra entry in the National Register of Historic Places, and that is the Waterworks right here downtown. You know, everywhere here in the Thumb Coast region has kind of an interesting and perhaps a unique connection with water. But one of the things that always surprises me is when you go back, you read about some of these cities and you try and figure out, like, oh, well, when did they get a wastewater treatment plant? They're sometimes surprisingly late, right? For a long time, cities have a solution. I'll give you, Port Huron, for example, had a solution which was, well, that's Marysville's problem. We didn't get a wastewater treatment plant until around World War II. This one came a little bit before that, but they eventually started mandating through state law, like, yeah, you need to treat your wastewater rather than just pump it directly out into the big river where it goes away. So this is a 1936 building. It's really, really pretty small, but we can actually see, it's the working building. We can actually see the city council. We can see all of the little markers right there next to the door where they have added to the building over the years, but we see that original 1935-36 plaque there, the one that has the most patina. So the historic waterworks here. Great Art Deco design here. We'll take a couple steps away. It's actually easier to see when we kind of see the whole building at one go. A city like Marine City, which only has like 4,000 or 5,000 residents, depending on the year, it's not too many. Building an entire water plant like this would be very, very expensive. So in the 1930s, there were a number of programs from the federal government where you could get money from the feds to partially cover the cost of this. And so that's what they were able to do. And that was kind of a work program too, at the height of Depression, getting people to get jobs to build buildings like this. And then of course there's jobs in operating the water plant. But little brick building, it's not particularly adorned, but it does have some little, it's kind of hard to see, maybe right above the windows we see a couple of bricks that stick out a little bit. That very geometric pattern, and that using a geometric motif in your decorating is what really makes this an Art Deco building, and shows you that sometimes a building that's has this major historical connection might not stand out all that much. You might drive by and not think too much of it, but there you go. There's an Art Deco building. It's got its own Wikipedia page, right? That's how you know it's a significant building, the Art Deco Waterworks here in Marine City. Again, it's neat to see a downtown with a lot of mixed buildings. Sometimes we see buildings that look a little bit more residential here. This one kind of looks a little bit like an upright wing, kind of a federal style to it, next to another one that's got kind of a mix as they've been added on, along with many of these kind of industrial facades, or commercial facades, I should say. Now, this is the other building that a lot of people have now come to associate Marine City with, and that is, of course, this lighthouse. Lighthouses, Michigan has more lighthouses than any other state in the entire country. We've got at least 129. It really depends on how you count. What counts as a lighthouse? How are you going to count them? And this is a great example of why that number is really hard to pin down exactly, right? So we see it says Marine City on there, but this lighthouse has not been there all that long. This is one that was actually moved here. This was a rear range light. I'm going to walk around the side and maybe take a little stroll through the quickly melting snow here of Lighthouse Park. Take a closer look here. So the thing about lighthouses, right? So they're an aid to navigation. There's a number of different types of lighthouse. Sometimes it can be one that's just like, hey, there's an island here, watch out. But sometimes there can be a range light, and a range light always comes in pairs. So you have a front range and a rear range that's a little bit taller, and they tell you basically how you might enter a channel or something like that, that you're on the right path. You can kind of see, like I said, it's a little bit of a hazy day, but here I put the sun right behind the lighthouse so we can get a really nice view at this kind of bolted construction. Very nautical for sure. So this was a rear range, and this was built in 1908, as we can see on the sign here. And this is my, here's my engagement bait, right? How do we say this? Is it Pesh Island? Peachy Island? Peach Island? There's lots of different ways that I have heard said over the years. I think Pesh Island, this is from the French for like fishing. So Pesh Island, not too far from here. Lots of little islands in the St. Clair River Delta, especially the further you get towards Lake St. Clair, the more islands we have. But it's been anglicized, so I've heard Peach Island, I've heard Peachy Island. Let me know, how do you say it? How do you say that? Throw that up in the comments below here. But this is one that was built. It was never manned. It was always kind of an automated light, even by 1908, when this, I believe, replaced an earlier structure. See a little window part way up, and again, they've painted Marine City. This is now an icon of the city here, but this isn't exactly the most useful of lighthouses like we think of with the other lights. Here we get a really good view of the river, Olive Brave, coming right out here to the edge. We can see all of that ice, although there's clear water right up there. And it's eerily quiet. There's not even a whole lot of crunching of all of that ice. But for all of the mariners now going by Marine City, boom, you can't miss it, right? They got their own little tower there. That was relocated in the 1980s when they were going to tear that down. Something that I think that's a great repurposing of something that would have otherwise just gone to scrap if we didn't move that somewhere. And that would be quite a move, right? If you think about what is involved in a little bit of disassembly, and that's a pretty big thing to move all the way here. But now an icon of Marine City for sure. So that's that other question I posed to you. You can answer in the comments. A rear range light. Now this light, like I said, it might be on a couple of maps, but it's not exactly acting as that aid to navigation anymore. Should this count as a lighthouse? Now it was part of a rear range light, so that was, you have a front range and a rear range. And I hope I explained this kind of in a way that makes sense. I always describe it as like the sights on a shotgun or the sights on a rifle. So you might have, you imagine my finger here as the front range, and you're coming in, and you move your boat, and oh, okay, they've lined up. That's how you know you're on the right track. There are range lights all over the place. In fact, there's a couple to get into Sarnia from the lake. There's two that are right by the condos on Thomas Edison Boulevard in Port Huron. They're very, very fancy range lights. Some of them are just like metal skeletons. They're basically big reflectors. So a lot of people wonder, well, especially if they don't have a lighthouse keeper, but do they count as a lighthouse? And perhaps more importantly, do they count as one lighthouse or two lighthouses? So now you can see why there is such controversy over the issue of lighthouses. Now let's also take a look while we're down here, again, closer to the water, closer to the ice. We can also see the backside of that water treatment plant. And again, we see some more of the kind of Art Deco geometric design, where there's kind of a little bit of darker brick coarse work and some of those dots above doors and windows. And even within the big tank here, where presumably there's water inside being processed, and they can process their water. And this is one of the things to remember, is just about every city has a wastewater treatment plant and a water treatment plant for their drinking water. So this is processing, new water in to the city from the lake, because there was this uptick in waterborne illnesses that can show up if you're not processing your drinking water, even from a place that has relatively clean water like the St. Clair River. There's always little bits in there that you have to process out, and then you have to have those wastewater treatment plants. When you're done with everything, ideally, you put those somewhere else. Port Huron rather famously has its wastewater treatment plant right in the middle of downtown as well. So, whole nice water treatment plant. Looks like, oh, they must be doing some work on one of the windows right over there, because we've got some, it's boarded up a little bit. So, nice and quiet day, as I mentioned before, here in Marine City. I think we'll walk to the end of the block and look at just a couple of the other kind of 19th century buildings that we can see in beautiful downtown Marine City. And that'll be a pretty good around the block, I think, for this area. You know, I always like to hear suggestions. So if you have any, and there's an area you think we should cover, we should go and see, anywhere in the Thumb Coast region, let us know in the comments, or you can always get a hold of me. I'm not too hard to find, Andrew Kercher. You can find me, I'm always on Facebook. I've got my emails, just my full name, andrewlkercher@gmail.com. Shoot me a message. I always like hearing from you. But, like I said, we'll flip things around and take a look at a couple of the other buildings. And one of the other things that I really want to walk down and see, but I think we'll wrap up today, is one of the beautiful theater marquees, because Marine City is also known for one of its theaters here in town. So really a big draw, especially for tourists to this area. Kind of at all times of year, but especially the spring and the summer. If you've ever gotten a chance to walk downtown then, that's when you know it's particularly nice. Can you imagine at one point that there were dozens of shipyards in and around the St. Clair River, the Belle River, building these tall masted ships? So they were all still sailing vessels, so lots of schooners, little barks, even tugboats. It would have been impossible to look out into the river and not see some of those masts, which gives Marine City its name. So I think that is something that's pretty cool to see. So again, we see kind of a mix of, there's some mid-century infill here with some more modern facades. We've got a bank, looks like, coming up here on the right. This is Marine Savings Bank. One of the things I always like is that, and we've talked about this before, architects use something called like an architectural vocabulary, right? So they have different types of building structures, different types of ornamentation can tell you what a building is, even if you're not right next to it. So, it's a theater today, but the savings bank here with these 4 great big columns and a classical entablature gives you this sense of sturdiness that you'd like to see in a bank. It's all kind of subliminal, right? It's all there. And in fact, this is a really good example of how they've added this kind of classical entablature, some of the smooth granite, to the front of a brick building. And we'll try and zoom in just a little bit. You can even see up there that row of dental. So we've got, these are Doric columns. So they're the simplest kind of columns. They're one of the oldest of the classical style. So they don't have like scrolls or acanthus leaves or anything at the top, or the capital is what that's called. And then the entablature is this part right up above. Very, very classic architectural, or archaeologically correct, as they would call that. There's different types, and some, if you're directly copying what they had in ancient Greece, it is archaeologically correct. It doesn't have to be, but some of them are. So that one's copying a very simple Greek style, real classy today. And here, of course, is the Mariner Theater. It's got this bright, lit up marquee. Theaters, especially around the turn of the 20th century and into the 1920s and 30s, in some senses were theaters' heydays, as they were building bigger, more ornate ones as movies became popular, first with silent films, then of course talkies by the end of the 20s. You have some of these beautiful marquees, lots and lots of light. That was kind of a new thing around the turn of the 20th century, a way you could show off by having lots of light bulbs. It's definitely a little, could be considered ostentatious, but it's conspicuous is what it is. And here we have one of these, it's next to one of these beautiful mid-century post offices. It probably dates, I would be willing to guess, like 1958 or 59. They went on a building spree right at the end of the Eisenhower administration, and there were post offices all over the country that looked exactly like this. Mid-century modern, very, very minimal, simple sans serif font on the outside. The simple flagpole doesn't even go all the way to the ground. But there is, again, that beautiful Mariner Theater that's got some shops in it today. So, I hope they enjoyed this. I've got a little bit of shopping to do myself here downtown. So I really am thankful that you tuned in and were able to walk with me around the block. So until next time, hopefully I'll see you in your neck of the woods. I'm Andrew Kercher with Thumb Coast TV for Around the Block.